Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome to Growing Through It, a podcast dedicated to bringing you clarity so that you can harness your curiosity and be the creator of your life. Hosted by me, Shanae Rowe. Hello, my lovelies, and welcome back to another episode of the potty. Thank you for listening in. Today's episode, number 8, is all about quitting. And more specifically, I am going to be discussing the resistance that we get when we want to quit something. So why we struggle to leave situations. And then I also want to discuss how quitting essentially can propel us forwards in our own personal development. So let's jump on into it, shall we? First off, I want to talk about where this desire to quit comes from. And essentially, I think that it has to do with just feeling unhappy or unsatisfied in a situation. When we're experiencing something, whether it is a job, a relationship, or just a circumstance, and it is not satisfying us, it's not making us happy or fulfilled anymore, that is where this desire to quit essentially comes from. Another reason that we do yearn to quit something as well is because of discomfort, right? Because we're uncomfortable. And I just want to state how wildly different these reasons are for quitting something, right? So you've got, first off, you want to quit something because you're unhappy. And then on the other side of the coin, we sometimes want to quit something because it's making us uncomfortable. And so I just want to quickly talk about sort of the difference between the two first, because it's really important to be able to differentiate between them. So unhappiness and dissatisfaction it's just that. We're not satisfied or pleased with a situation or circumstance. And satisfy is basically to meet the needs and expectations or the desires of ourselves, right? So if we're exposing ourselves to a situation, right, whether it is a work situation, a relationship situation, any of the sorts, it could be a hobby, if that thing is not meeting our own individual needs, then we're not going to want to do it, which is fair enough. You know, we don't want to be subjecting ourselves to situations that don't align with us. And then on the other side, we've got uncomfortable, and that just means causing or feeling unease or awkwardness, right? Which, when you think about it, is a totally different thing to unhappiness, right? We're going to be exposed to uncomfortable things throughout our entire lives. And it's really important to be able to differentiate between discomfort and unhappiness or dissatisfaction. Because if you're choosing to quit situations because they're just making you uncomfortable, because you're exposing yourself to unfamiliar things, then that isn't how we grow. That's the exact opposite of how we grow. That's just running away. But if you can understand the difference and then choose to quit things based on a situation not meeting your needs, then you're going to be able to more easily move through these tricky situations, and that is how we grow, right? So first and foremost, I think it's really important that if you are wanting to quit something, if you want to quit your job, if you want to leave a relationship or pull out of a marathon you've been training for a long time, you need to understand why you want to do that. Is it because you're unhappy? Is it because you're not having your needs met? Or is it because you're uncomfortable? Is it because this thing is causing you a little bit of resistance and restlessness? So yeah, that's just sort of where this desire to quit something comes from. And it's completely normal to have these feelings arise. It's completely normal to be uncomfortable in situations from time to time. And it's totally okay as well to be unsatisfied with a situation that you're in. And as well as that, it's okay to all of a sudden change your mind and realize that you aren't happy in some sort of situation or circumstance, or if you've been in a job for years on end and you realize you're actually not happy, you've changed as a person, your values have changed, you're unhappy, you're allowed to quit. And as well, you're more than able to quit something if that thing is making you uncomfortable, but just note that you're not going to learn anything new by running away from the challenges that are presented to you. All right, so let's jump into sort of the second point that I wanted to talk about in this episode, which is what stops us from leaving a situation when we feel like we need to. What is there blocking us, right? Holding us back from making the decision to leave a situation or a circumstance, quit a job, right? End a relationship. Obviously, you've probably guessed it. I talk about it all the bloody time, but it's fear of the unknown. It's such an innate part of being human. We don't like unfamiliar things. So basically, if we've been doing something for a while and we know what to expect, and the thought itself of quitting, of doing something different, of having to navigate the aftermath of leaving something, right, that has been a big part of our lives is scary. And so our minds are going to be more inclined to not want to follow through with that decision of quitting, right? When that feeling arises of the unknown, we go into this battle with our own mind and we start to our head starts to fight with our heart, right? Our rational and logic brain starts to fight with our emotions and with our heart and with our true desires. We try and sort of weigh up the logical part of sticking something out and how it's going to benefit us in all these ways purely because it feels familiar. And as well, because our brains don't want to consider the whole aspect of newness, of uncertainty. So we go into this head versus heart battle. Our rational and logical mind starts fighting with our emotions and our heart and our intuition. And that as well is a completely normal part of quitting something, all right? Our minds are going to be weighing up all the possible scenarios, what's going to happen if we don't quit this job and we stick it out. What skills are we going to develop? How's our life going to look? Like, it's going to be okay. It's just a little rough patch. We're going to get through it. And meanwhile, our hearts are telling us that, no, it's actually not what I want anymore. I've grown as a person. I have different beliefs and values. And if I stick this out, if I continue working in this job, it's actually not going to get me to the places that I want to go. It's not going to help me develop the aspects of myself that I really want to work on to grow as a person. So initially, when we do have this idea to quit a job, for instance, we are weighing it up, head versus heart all the time. We don't want to listen to our intuition. We don't want to listen to our instincts telling us to quit, but our logic brain is trying to make us stay, right? Because it feels safe, because we know the outcomes, because we've painted this picture in our mind of what our lives are going to look like if we continue down this road. And so we're actually attached to that image itself. And the reason that we don't want to quit is because quitting means letting go of that image, right? It means letting go of what our lives are going to look like. And our minds try to make us feel like letting go of that idea, of that beautiful life that we've painted in our minds, is so much more painful than actually moving on and going with the flow and finding something else that aligns with us more. But I think it's really important to note that nothing ever turns out the way that we plan, whether it's good or bad, right? The scenarios that we come up with in our minds, they don't turn out that way, right? There have been so many times in my life where I have envisioned what my life is going to look like in the next year or 3 years or 5 years. And it never in a million years has turned out how I've imagined it, right? And the wonderful thing is, it's always turned out even better than I could have ever possibly imagined. And that's something that I really want to share with you guys, especially because when it comes to quitting something, we sort of think of worst case scenario, right? Like if we quit something, like this is going to happen and this is going to happen, and it's just like, I'm not going to get to the places that I want to go. But in fact, it's quite the opposite. It's more so if you quit something based on the fact that you are unhappy or you are not satisfied, then you're basically telling the world, like, hey, I am not accepting this and I deserve more and I deserve better. And ask and you shall receive, because once you quit that job or relationship or anything, right? Once you gain the courage to quit something when you know in your heart that it isn't made for you and it isn't right, then the universe provides you with something even better, right? It chucks something in your life, whether it's a new job or like travel or adventure or people that align with you more, right? So nothing ever turns out the way we plan. You can imagine something, you can spend your days thinking about the outcomes of scenarios that you've created, and 100% of the time, it is never, ever, ever going to be how you imagined. And so once you let go of that need to try and control the outcomes of your present situations, it's going to be a lot easier to say no to things, to quit things that aren't made for you, right? Because when you think about it, saying no to something means saying yes to something else. Quitting a job that you don't like, that isn't fulfilling your needs, that isn't allowing you to develop the skills that you want or allowing you to become the person that you want to be, is just allowing you to find a better job that does help you get to those places, right? So yeah, like when it comes to making hard decisions, our brains try to conceptualize things. We try to make it make sense. And we talk ourselves out of choosing options that have the most unknowns, even when that option feels right. So if we want to quit a job, for instance, and we have all of these reasons that it's not working for us, that it doesn't align with us, like if we're doing an apprenticeship or we're studying something to get into a job and we realize we don't even want to work that job anymore, like we graduate or we complete an apprenticeship and we have no interest in working in that industry or field, we still try to continue to follow that path because we feel like we know the outcomes, right? We don't feel like there's a whole lot of uncertainty there because we've had so much time to think about all the possible scenarios that come up with it that we think are going to be created from that. Another thing that kind of prevents us from quitting something is this phenomenon called the sunk cost fallacy, right? And it's basically just the ways that we rationalize with ourselves, right? It's this idea that we've invested so much of our money, of our effort, of our time into something, and it would be a waste, and I say that in quotations, it would be a waste to abandon this thing. So say you're studying, for example, and you're about maybe 2 years into a 3-year course, and you're like, well, I actually have no intention of going into this line of work. Like, I really don't want to do it. I've changed as a person. I've had all these experiences, and I know that working a job in this industry just isn't going to make me happy. And you're like, well, I kind of want to quit it, but, and this is what the sunk cost fallacy is, right? It's you rationalizing with yourself. You're like, well, I've spent so much money on this course. Like, I can't really quit. I've only got a year left. I may as well stick it out, right? I've put so much effort into completing all of my assignments and all of my exams. I've spent so many hours studying. I have given up so much of my time that I could be spending with friends in order to study and get good marks, right? The effort that I've put in, it'd sort of be a waste if I dropped out now. I've only got a year to go. I may as well stick to it, right? And time. So it's only a 3-year course. It's only a 3-year degree. I've already completed 2. I have 1 left, right? I'm 2/3 of the way through. I've got a third left. I may as well just stick it out for this last year. It would be a waste. It would be a waste of my money, a waste of my time, and a waste of my effort if I quit right now, right? So that's the sunk cost fallacy. It's this reluctance to leave, even when it's clear that leaving is better for us, right? Even if you've spent so much of your spare time thinking of other things you could be doing, whether that's traveling, whether that's transferring into another course or degree, whether that is just going into the workforce, doing something that you are passionate about, right? Even if you have all of these other options and directions to move towards, the sunk cost fallacy is this thing of like, well, I've put my money into it and effort and time, so I may as well just stick it out. Another reason, and I think this is a big reason why we struggle to quit things, why we struggle to leave situations that no longer serve a purpose in our life. And it's because we don't want to be branded as a quitter. And I think this comes from limiting beliefs that we as a society have unconsciously passed down and unconsciously adopted about quitting and about leaving things that aren't right for us. So I think somewhere along the lines, we have been inherently taught that quitting is the worst thing that you can do. And I think this idea goes deeper than just the surface, right? Because it's not actually about quitting something, right? We perceive it as an attack on our character and who we are as a person. Think about the times where like someone else has quit, they've given up on something, right? Or you've given up on something and you get in your head like that you're lazy or that you lack persistence or you're not disciplined enough, you don't have drive, or maybe you feel like you're dumb because you can't like stick to a degree or an apprenticeship or something, right? We are inherently taught that quitting is bad and that we are weak because we can't endure uncomfortable things, right? It's like stick it out. The only reason you want to quit is because it's hard. You push through the hard and you'll feel better. And I disagree with that for the most part. Because like I was saying at the start, the desire to quit something comes from discomfort or unhappiness. And I do believe that if we want to quit something purely based on the fact that it's making us uncomfortable and pushing us out of our comfort zones, it's probably not the best reason to quit something. It's not reason enough to quit a job or a uni course or an apprenticeship or leave a relationship, right? Because there's like a little hurdle or a challenge to overcome. But I do think that when you are in touch with who you are as a person, your values and beliefs, and you are aware that a situation is making you unhappy and is making you unsatisfied, then quitting is the best thing that you could possibly do in your entire life, right? Leaving something is what you need to do in those circumstances. And so, in that sense, quitting something does not make us weak. It doesn't mean we're a bad person and that we're lazy because we can't endure something that's uncomfortable or hard, right? It's a whole lot of bullcrap because things that are right for us feel right. The thought of quitting something to do something else, if that feels right for you, if you feel calm and if you feel at peace with that decision, then that's right for you. And quitting in that circumstance is the best thing that you can do. And I think it becomes a bit of a challenge when we have all of these beliefs and values that have been sort of thrusted upon us and we are conditioned to believe. Quitting becomes difficult when you can't see the line. You can't differentiate between wanting to quit because you're just lazy or wanting to quit because you're actually not happy doing what you're doing. And I think honestly, I say this all the time, that you yourself know what is right for you. When you start to befriend yourself and get comfortable with your own company, then you know what is right for you. And I think the biggest indication that quitting is the right thing for you to do is when you don't have to talk yourself into staying. If you're in a job where you are unhappy, even like 40% of the time, I think even 40% of the time, like you're unhappy is way too much. But if you are unhappy the majority of the time in a relationship or in a job, and the only reason that you're staying is because you're talking yourself into staying because you've attached yourself onto this fairy tale idea of how things should be in your mind, then that is not reason enough to stay. That is precisely the moment that you quit. And I want to talk about sort of what happens in our minds and bodies when we stick something out, when we're ignoring that sensation of wanting to quit. When we ignore our desire to quit, to leave a situation, what happens to us? What happens in our minds and what happens in our bodies? Because, like, for me personally, in my experience, staying somewhere that I know isn't right for me has caused me so much unnecessary suffering, right? The idea of quitting something is really painful and uncomfortable. And that alone sort of keeps us put. It keeps us from quitting. The idea of quitting and having those uncomfortable conversations prevents us from quitting in the first place. But what happens when we continue to resist that? So initially, like I've spoken about it a little bit already, but we have this initial resistance. It's this internal fighting between our brain and between our heart. And I have found in my own personal experiences that if you continue to ignore your heart and that intuition and that deeper sense of wisdom, you will get to a point where your mind is screaming at you to quit. So, how I like to describe it is that you get this initial urge to quit something. You want to leave a relationship, you want to quit a job, and your inner voice is like, okay, it's probably time for us to leave, right? This isn't serving us anymore. It's time to go. And the longer you ignore that little voice, the louder that it gets. All right? Until all of a sudden it is screaming at you to leave. It is screaming so loudly that it's almost all that you can think about. The need to quit consumes you. And personally, that's pretty painful. It's a really, really painful state of mind to be in when you're constantly trying to push down how you truly feel, because that's easier than actually addressing something and quitting something and embracing the uncertainty and the whole idea of change. So the whole reason we're sort of pushing the desire to quit down is because quitting feels harder than not quitting, right? Staying in our circumstance feels easier than trying something else. All right. And the longer you leave it like that, the louder that little voice gets. That little whisper becomes louder and louder and so unbearable that all of a sudden you'll switch. And the thought of quitting actually feels so much more peaceful, and it brings you so much more relief than staying where you are. But it's a really challenging process. And it is so much easier, and it's so much better for our sanity if we just listen to that at the start. If we listen to that little voice telling us to quit, to leave. Because then we don't end up in this whirlwind of crazy emotions and this intense battle between our head and our heart. Another thing that happens is we sort of get this identity crisis, I like to call it. When our undesired circumstances ask us to behave in ways that we don't feel resonate with us, we have this resistance. We don't want to let go of who we are in order to become someone that fits that lifestyle, whether that's a job or relationship or anything like that. We have this identity crisis. For me, I was working at a job that was developing my skills, right? It was really helping me in some aspects, but essentially, I felt like it was asking me to change core values of myself and core beliefs in order to fill that role and to do a good job in that role. And I went through a massive identity crisis because I was really sort of attached to the values and beliefs that I held. And I felt as though if I continued working in that role, that I would have to change those values and those beliefs to something else that I actually did not want to have. And I think like sometimes we are willing to change those parts of ourselves and sometimes we're not. And I think in the circumstances where we aren't willing, quitting is probably a good thing. All right. But we sort of have this identity crisis of, a new job will ask us to step up and morph into something different, which is just a natural part of life. A new relationship, you're going to learn more about yourself and you're going to develop skills in one area and other areas. And because of that, you change as a person. But when we can identify that sort of the outcome isn't something that we desire, and if that outcome entails us to become someone that we don't feel like we deserve to become, then yeah, we sort of have this little identity crisis. Another thing that sort of happens when we resist quitting something is that we feed into the beliefs that are taught to us. So like what I was saying before, how we have this inherent feeling that quitting is bad, that we are bad people if we quit, that we're lazy or we're weak or we're not persistent enough. We ourselves can feed into that narrative and put pressure on ourselves and talk down to ourselves and just be quite nasty to who we are and how we feel, right? We can begin to doubt ourselves and we don't trust our judgment anymore, which can lead to low self-esteem and feeling stuck in situations where we sort of lose focus on what we even want anymore because we just feel stuck and we feel so heavy and that things are just like weighing down on us. So in instances like that is when we create our own psychological suffering. So resisting change in the form of quitting something is what causes our suffering. It's what causes us to be even more unhappy than what we initially are, right? Because our spirit knows what we want and what we deserve and what we desire. And if that means quitting a job or ending a relationship, all right, or ending friendships, anything of the such, and then if we have all these limiting inherent beliefs that we feed into on top of that, then it's really just a recipe for internal pain and suffering. And in those instances, that is when we need the most self-compassion and we need to really sit down with ourselves and think, hey, what do I actually want? Who do I actually want to be? And maybe quitting isn't the worst case scenario and it's not what everyone makes it out to be. Because when you think about it, the more you quit something, the more you expose yourself to new experiences. The more experiences you have, the more skills you're developing, the more things that you're learning. So if you think about it from sort of that angle, quitting essentially can be something that is really beneficial to us and it can propel us forward. As well as that, like when we quit something, we're learning to say no. Like I said earlier, when we say no to something, it means we're saying yes to something else that is a better fit for us. We're learning to stand up for ourselves. We're standing up for our values. We're allowed to say no to something if we feel like that thing is going to be a conflict of interest with our values. We as people can't put ourselves into situations that don't align with our core values. And these values are completely different for every single person. And so quitting allows us to strengthen our beliefs because when we expose ourselves to something new, then we are starting to understand what is right for us, what works for us, what makes us feel the most at home and at ease and at peace. So saying no essentially is just a yes in a different form. You're one step closer to creating that life of abundance, of knowing what fills your cup, of what satisfies you, of what aligns with you. So yeah, that's my hot take on quitting and why I think that it can be the most beneficial thing you can do for yourself. As well, though, remember to always try and understand the reason why you want to quit something. If it's because you're outside of your comfort zone and feeling sort of uncertain and unsafe, that I don't think is reason enough to quit something. Because as we all know, getting outside our comfort zone is where we grow. But in instances where we're feeling unhappy and where we know that something isn't made for us, deep in our hearts, in our core, we know that, a job, a relationship, or something just isn't right, it doesn't feel right, then by all means, go ahead and quit. Quit once, quit twice, quit 63 times. It's all part of this wacky little journey we're on. So that is all from me today. Thank you to everybody who has taken the time to listen to this episode. I hope you've learnt something. If you have, share it around on your stories or with friends and family. It really means a lot to me. But that is all from me today. Get on out there and enjoy your big, beautiful life. Bye.